What is a story? It's a term that we use all the time. It's something that we instinctively think we know when we see it or encounter it. We're all critics and judges of stories, including children, who I think are excellent judges of stories. And yet they're almost impossible to describe or explain or create. Not impossible, but very, very hard. So, what are they? Well, let's start with something simple. A story is a genre of communication, right? You can say or write lots of things that are not stories. Stop, not a story. Yield, speed limit 55. Good morning. That's hot. Lots of things you can say, things that you can produce, write down, are not stories. So what distinguishes a story, a group of words or utterances that make it a story, that separate it out or distinguish it from something else? Well, I would say that, and I'm relying a little bit on Aristotle, a little bit on John Gardner here, but I agree, is a story is a sequence of events, and I'll explain what I mean by an event in a second, but it's a sequence of events that allow the listener, or reader, let's call it a listener, but the listener to get a sense of tension, that they are moving some ways towards a resolution of that tension. The tension, though, could be a mystery to solve. It could be a problem to solve. It could also be reaching an understanding of something that at the beginning you don't understand. And eventually you do reach an understanding and you feel a sense of, that's what. That makes sense. There are lots of ways to feel a sense of anxiety and lots of ways that can be, in a sense, released or relieved. Stories, in some way, need to capture your attention and hold it. And so in order to do that in some successful manner, there needs to be some reason for you to continue to be listening. And that means that there's something about it that makes you want to know something. You need to be in it, but feel that there's more to be learned or encountered or experienced. So there are two elements to this, sort of theoretically speaking. One of them is that central tension, however modest it may be. And the second is the movement towards the resolution of that tension. Kurt Vonnegut once famously said, I think it was a 1977 interview he did with the Paris Review, and he was being asked about what we would today refer to as postmodern fiction, right, where they break down all the different rules. And he said, sometimes it's great to play with technique. I'm paraphrasing. It's great to play with technique, and sometimes really good things can come out of throwing out the rule book and trying again. So he wasn't sort of against that in principle, but he said that at the end of the day, people need to want something. And he said, even if it's just a glass of water. Aaron Sorkin, when he talks about writing, he's not a novelist, but obviously he's a storyteller. When he talks about writing, he often talks about, I forget the exact two terms he uses, but I'm trying to remember. He talks about obstacles, but the other term, I forget the word he uses. But anyway, the things that people want and then the things that get in the way of them having them. If you don't have those two things there, then there is no way to structure movement. I don't think that's I think in a broad sense I can agree with that, but I think that one doesn't want to be too literal about what it means to have an obstacle. An obstacle could be a wall. It could be, and that's your basic car chase is, trying to get away, and then there are lots of things that pop out in front of you, and where you drive along and bump into them or try not to bump into them, whatever the case might be. And that's all well and good. But it can also be that if you're trying to hold a relationship together, there's just some way that you're failing in some deep way to understand the other person. And until you reach that coherent sense of motive or emotional coherence, you're never going to be able to really accept that person or forgive that person. And therefore the entire relationship and the children and the extended family and the mortgage and whatever else is at risk, it's not going to be savable until you come to forgive someone or understand someone or believe someone. These things are very real. Sorry, my rug's bothering me here. So a story then is going to be about something that, some central tension that you've identified as being interesting to you, because you're the one who's going to be stuck with this thing while you're doing it. And things that are preventing that from being easily resolved, but also a sense of moving towards. Now, what's interesting about the last bit is this. You have to constantly be working against yourself. So in one way, here's resolution. Boop, done. But here, the thing's in the way. As you're riding along, you have to manage both of those tensions. That balancing, that movement is going to create the movement of the genre. The movement of the drama, not the genre, the drama. So if things move along, if they're too easy, right? You got Curious George and, this thing's done. And you're like, well, not much really happened. That wasn't really much of a story. If it's too slow, if it's constantly being hindered, constantly being set back, it can frustrate the reader but frustrate them in a bad way, not in a way that makes them kind of get even more involved. Because you think it's going ahead and then it's actually going backwards. And there comes a certain point where you're like, is this going anywhere? Is this ever going to move? I mean, there seems to be no hope that this story is going to get to an end. If on a winter's night a traveler, who did that? Italo Calvino, I think. He played with that in that novel, where it was just a series of beginnings and beginnings and beginnings and beginnings. And could there ever be a sense of completion and resolution if there is no ending? If there is only a sense but no actual completion? My answer is no, but that's up to you. But it was a very interesting thought experiment. You can read that if you're curious. When do you do this and when do you do this? That's the art. There is no, you have to be the judge. And how this works is this. Who you are, how you write, how you judge when it's time to get things moving and when it's time to slow them down and all of that, that's your unique sense of dramatic timing and dramatic arts. If you work in a writer's room and you have to put in it on a TV show and you have to put together a 20-minute television show, your natural innate sense of things is going to be far less relevant because you are really going to have to get this thing started on minute 1 and wrapped up no later than minute 20. And during that time, there are going to have to be a couple of peaks and troughs, zeniths and naders. I don't know what term to use. Highs and lows, highs and lows, highs and lows, highs and lows. There are going to have to be some emotional highs and lows, dramatic highs and lows. And some of these things are really quite algebraic or algorithmic, and which is why every TV show can begin to feel the same. It's because they do feel the same. They are designed to feel the same. A novel, on the other hand, isn't tied to that. It takes 20 minutes to watch, some comedy on Netflix, 30 minutes max. Takes 10 and a half, 11, 12 hours to read a novel, right? Which most people don't sit down and do it, so it could be spread out over a week, spread out over 3 months. So you're going to have to figure out how to deal with that, and that's going to come over time. And the way it comes over time is the more you write, the more you'll reach an understanding of your own writing. That sounds nuts, because it sounds like your writing is something distinct and separate from you, like my glasses. I can stare at my glasses and eventually come to an understanding of them. I can understand their size and their weight and how well the titanium does or doesn't bend or break or whatever, all that stuff, because it's something separate from me. Am I saying your writing is something separate from you? Yeah. I can't explain it. It's magic, but it is. Eventually, the art that you create has its own independent life. And eventually, you're going to have to step back from it and study this thing that you've created in order to begin to find patterns in it. Here's an example. Many writers are asked about what their life's work is about, right? He or she writes about this. Sometimes you know that. Sometimes you have an intellectual commitment or dramatic commitment as you step into this stuff when you begin. But very often a writer doesn't know what themes dominated his mind until the end of a career. At the end of your career, then you can go, oh, looks like I was really thinking about my mother. Looks like I was really thinking about unrequited love. It looks like I really could never get away with the search for a home. Whatever. Is that important? Maybe. It's from the perspective of studying literature and authors and biographies and all that, it's fascinating. From the perspective of being a writer and creating art, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I would just dive in and deal with whatever it is that's moving you at the moment. So, a story, to repeat myself, but to wrap this one up more quickly than my usual 20 minutes, is that you have come up with something that is on your mind that you want to spend time on. You are going to trust the world. This is a huge leap of faith. You're going to trust that the things that occupy you, your imagination, your heart, your soul, your sense of drama, your curiosity, everything that motivates you to write will somehow or other be received and recognized in this world. This is not actually true, right? Van Gogh didn't sell a painting, right? And now, years on, here we are. So lots of artists are out of sync with their time. And they might be ahead of their times, they might be behind their times, they might just be off to the side and never recognized. They might be. Which means that it's an incredibly high risk endeavor. But I haven't figured out any other way to proceed. If you want to create entertainment products and position them in a particular market by studying the state of the discourse of comedy or tragedy or dramedy or whatever, and you want to situate a particular thematic and tone and modality into that marketplace and create a set of entertainment products, you can possibly do that. Right? Maybe David Kelly on television has done that over the years. It is doable. It might make you rich. It might not. It is very unlikely you can do that in a meaningful way as a novelist. If you can, let me know. But most of us don't go into writing with that mentality. And I think it's very hard to sustain your own interest and effort and isolation and risk and editing and sense of artistic well-being and all of that because this is your life. This isn't a lifestyle. This is not a dry run. This is it. This is your one and only lap. And if you're doing this, then you got to be doing something that you want to be doing. And if you hate what you're doing with the idea that you're going to make money from this in the end, you're going to be screwed. Because if you work at Goldman Sachs, they're paying you all the time. When you're writing a book, nobody's paying you. This is all supply and no demand. And there's a lot of competition out there providing supply for free. And there's shrinking demand. If you don't bring the love, then I don't think it's going to end up on the page, and I don't think you're going to be successful. But what do I know? I'm not James Patterson. When to begin is I'm going to talk about in a separate video discussion. But I would say this, it is time to get writing when you feel some urgent sense that there's something really interesting and exciting that you want to understand, and you think that there are some characters that you've even begun to sketch out, you've begun to imagine, who you can begin to imagine being the people to deal with that problematic or that mystery or that understanding, all those words that I used before. Then it's time to sit down and see if you can get your story started. I'm done for now. Thank you.